Welcome to the Maze MasterCast. I'm your host, Ben Wiggins, and per usual, it's a beautiful day in Aggieland. Welcome to the show, Ximena.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Thanks for joining us. You grew up and your undergraduate career was in Peru. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I grew up in Peru. That's where all my family still lives. Mm-hmm. And I studied my undergrad there, where I got an undergrad in business. And then my first two jobs were also in Peru, working as a marketing manager. And then since 2008, I've been moving around quite a bit, mostly because of professional opportunities, where I first moved to Central America. It all started when I studied my MBA in Nicaragua. So I was there for a little bit less than 2 years. I then did an internship in Panama, so was there for a couple of months. And then I ended up also moving to Costa Rica, where I spent a couple of years there. Mm-hmm. And it was then in Costa Rica when I met a professor who works at Duke University and offered me a job in his lab.
And was that Dan Ariely?
Yes. So I worked with Dan Ariely, who's a professor in behavioral economics, and he literally is the person who introduced me to this field.
I know who he is because of his games. He creates games, and I've seen ads for them on Facebook and probably on Amazon as well. I've asked myself several times, how must a person's mind work who creates these things? What were your interactions like?
I learned a lot working with him for a couple of years, and that's how I decided I wanted to pursue a career in academia and study consumer behavior. So when I met Dan, he offered me a job for a year in his lab, where he was working on a cross-cultural project with one of his Ph.D. students, and he needed someone who would help with that project and would travel to different countries to supervise data collection. Okay. So it was a 1-year opportunity, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to first work with him and also actually figure out if I wanted to do a PhD, which was something I was considering but not sure about what it meant and what actually doing a PhD would be like and what it would do with a PhD after. So my first year there, I loved it. I was like, I really get paid to study people and understand why we do things. And so I told him, working with you, I know I want to get a PhD in consumer behavior, it's understanding human behavior, and it made sense. Marketing PhD, given my background in business and marketing. So I stayed for a year and a half more while I was applying to grad school. So he was like, why don't you stay here? You continue doing research while you submit your applications to grad school. Okay. And I got in, and I accepted an offer from Harvard Business School to get a PhD in business. So in 2015, I moved to Boston, and I was there for 6 years getting my PhD.
Yes. And what was that like? I mean, Harvard Business School, it's, obviously one of the top names, if not the top name in the country, depending on the year, I guess. But what would surprise people about that experience?
I feel incredibly lucky, first of all, to have the opportunity to study there. First of all, Boston is a community. There are also a lot of schools, so there's a lot of collaboration and communication between different schools. So the intellectual community is very big. So it was, in that sense, it was awesome. And of course, there were moments that were hard and I struggled. But in those moments, I was always trying to remind myself to be grateful and take a step back and maybe see the big picture. Wow, I'm here. I'm a woman from a developing country who was raised and born and raised in Peru and made it this far. So it's just try to see things from a big picture and move on. And that also helped me give me some motivation during the times that I was maybe struggling as a PhD student.
What were your biggest struggles other than the obvious academic rigor? It's very competitive. What was more difficult than you expected?
Yeah, I would say two things. So the first one I think is a general thing that I would say most PhD students can relate to, which is loneliness. It's a career or a path that it can be a bit lonely.
Right.
I think the second point that for me was challenging was that I had my son in the middle of the program. So I haven't mentioned this, but I got married My husband, he's from Costa Rica, so I met him when I study the MBA there. And since then, we moved together to the States, to North Carolina. Then we moved to Boston together. And I had a son in 2018. So it was right as soon as I went down with my third year. And I took a few months off. I then went back to work. As I mentioned, I was done with my courses, so I had flexibility to work from home, which is was great to be with my son, but still continue doing my research and working on my dissertation. But it still was a huge additional responsibility on top of the pressure of
no kidding.
You need to finish this dissertation. And then in March 2020, the pandemic hit. So I was at home finishing my dissertation with my 2-year-old son. As you might remember, institutions were closed, the university, everything went remote, and that included childcare.
I do remember.
So I was 6 months at home with my son. And my husband moved to work remote. So we were both at home, but we both had work responsibilities. And my plan, which ended up happening, was graduate in May 2021. And to do that, I had to submit applications for academic jobs in the summer of 2020. So it was around that same time I was finishing my dissertation with my son at home, and all the universities had a hiring freeze because of the pandemic. So it was, I think, 2020 for me and us as a family was a very uncertain and challenging year.
Sure. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How did you handle childcare? Like, how did you take care of your son?
Yeah, I look back now and when both my husband and I reflect about that time, we're like, wow, it was really challenging. Like, I don't know how we made it, we survived, but the days felt really long. Like when I remember, the days were very long, where we were doing shifts of 2 hours. So each person would lock themselves in a room and would work for 2 hours, and the other person would be with my son for 2 hours, and we just would come up with activities, would go for walks. We would work also a lot at nights. He would nap, so he would nap for 2 hours in the middle of the day, and then he would go to bed around 7-ish, 7:30, and then I would work from 7:30 to 10 or 11. So I would just have to make up the hours that I was not getting during the day.
Right.
And also, in addition to setting up just a new schedule for us as a family, I also had to lower a little bit my standards or expectations as a mom. Where in my role as a mom, and I think again, most parents might relate to this. You have very high expectations of what you should be doing to be a good parent. And I had high expectations I don't want my son to watch TV, or screen time was something that was not allowed in our home before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Or everything has to be homemade and cooked perfectly for him every day and fresh. And during the pandemic, you have to sacrifice some of those, I don't want to call them values, but some of those ideals or expectations that you have to just survive.
You talked about the questions that you wanted to be asking, the questions that were the most compelling. Where do you feel like your career is going in terms of your research identity, and what's that journey been like?
My research area in general, I define it as consumer behavior and well-being within the context of personal relationships. So thinking about just how consumers make decisions when others, by others I mean people they love, are involved in some way in the consumption experience. And I would have to disclose that it's actually maybe a selfish way to try to answer some of the questions in my own life. So I call it sometimes me search, where I see something that I do, or I see something that my husband does, or something that happens in the context of our family. And I oh, why are we doing this? This is weird. This is not rational. This is not efficient. Why are we behaving in this way? So I would say that's how I find the questions that intrigue me, and always thinking about them in a marketing context, and always thinking that it's not something specific that we do. It's just 2 people in the world doing it, but something that maybe a lot of families are also doing. And if they were doing something different, they might be better off with a different system or a different strategy.
Okay, such as now I'm fascinated.
Yeah, so one of the areas I'm super excited about that I'm working on several projects in this is I call caring consumption. So it's the idea that consumers often make decisions when they are providing care for people they love. Okay.
Right.
So to give you a specific example, in one project, I study the role of effort in the context of caregiving, and specifically thinking about how consumers perceive products that could reduce the amount of effort that they have to exert in a caregiving task. So products that would simplify caregiving, like a pre-made meal, or like these automatic robotic cribs that would rock the babies back to sleep. That's new. The famous new, which I end up doing work with them as part of my dissertation.
Oh, okay.
And I find I conducted a series of experiments in the lab, in the field, and I find that consumers often feel bad about themselves when using these products that could simplify caregiving. And that's because they feel that they have to exert effort by doing the task themselves without the support of a product to demonstrate that they love the people.
And the recipient. Here is the inefficiency.
And here's the inefficient, where I find myself in that same role, like as a mom. When my son started eating solids around 6 months, I got this book and said, like, okay, solids, let's start thinking about nutrition. And I would go every day to Whole Foods, which was just 2 blocks away from my place, and I would get a few ingredients for the solid that we're trying that day. And then I would spend like maybe 30 minutes in the kitchen making the food from scratch every day.
My goodness.
And my husband looked at me and said, like, you are complaining that you don't have time, that childcare hours are not enough, that you have to work on your dissertation, and here you're spending like 2 hours cooking for him, and sometimes he doesn't even eat it. He doesn't like it and he spits it, or it's just like he has 3 bites. So
I know that world well.
So there must be other options or other alternatives that are equally nutritious, and that could save you some time. And I started thinking about my work. Yes, there are like some pre-made meals are easy, just 2 minutes, and you have like a range of options. Some pre-made meals might be say like they're not that nutritious, or they're frozen food compared to food made from scratch. But there are a series of alternative like services that deliver like homemade food. So it's just a matter of like, as a caregiver, you feel that the process of like exerting effort is actually valuable and helping you show you love the recipient, which psychologically is really interesting. So I understand. I try with my work. I try to understand how consumers react psychologically to products. For example, in this context, that simplify caregiving, and then what can marketers do to actually advertise these products in a way that doesn't trigger these negative emotional consequences.
What are the words you have to move toward? Are there words you have to stay away from? What have you learned?
Yeah. We have some evidence. We're actually working with Happiest Baby, the manufacturer, the company that manufactures and commercializes this new smart grip. So as I was working on this project, and I found this desire to exert effort in caregiving, I also collected a lot of ads from companies that sell these type of products that can support caregivers. And I kept identifying that the companies would highlight in their ads that the product would save you time or effort. So slogans would be like, oh, let us do the job, or this will save you time, or a meal in 5 minutes. And I started thinking like, oh, I think maybe it's the fact that if you highlight that the product saves you effort, it's even worse. Like, we know that consumers value effort, and then in the ad you're telling them like, oh, don't do it, save time and effort. So then it either backfires to caregivers. I'm not saying to consumers generally. This is a segment of people who are providing care to others. But I started thinking like, maybe this highlighting effort is not a great idea when you're advertising to caregivers, because it's reminding them that they're not exerting enough effort. So we tested first in a study online with ads, where we created some ads for a hypothetical company that delivers pre-made meals. One ad was like highlighting the effort reduction feature, and then the other ad was acknowledging caregivers' efforts. So instead of just saying like, this saves you time, or let us do the job. It would say like, you've already done a lot. Let us help you. Let us support you.
Oh, very clever.
And we saw that caregivers perceive that acknowledging caregivers' effort more positively.
Sometimes guilt comes from a good place, but the guilt itself is usually a hindrance rather than a help. And I think that is something like I think our country understands mental health issues and emotional intelligence far better than we did 15 years ago, far better. But what you're talking about right now is the kind of, I didn't do it this way because I felt bad. That's a problem. And it's still a problem. And I think helping people move past that is in many ways one of the really significant next challenges for us in business culture, but also just civilization more at large, is being able to overcome that. Okay, so that's January, it's early 2021, and then you end up coming to Mays. So why here?
So as I mentioned, I was applying to jobs in 2020. So that was like summer. It was supposed to be summer, but the pandemic hit, so it delayed a little bit. But I applied to jobs in that fall. Yeah. And at some point, I wasn't sure if I was going to find a job, in the sense like school had hiring freezes. But I knew I wanted an academic job. I knew going to industry was not a possibility for me, even though getting a PhD in marketing and consumer behavior, I have some skills that are definitely like could be used in industry positions. But I knew I wanted to be an academic. I knew I wanted to be a professor, and I knew I wanted a job at a business school.
Yeah.
So luckily, Mays had a position. They posted in the fall. I interviewed. Everything was virtual. So like all my interviews were virtual. I got the offer in November, and it was a very easy decision, to be honest, where I was hoping to end up a place where I could keep doing my research, and I had support to do it. Yeah. There was a good community in terms of colleagues that are, again, supportive, also doing interesting work, but there's also a community of kindness and collegiality, and I found that here, especially in the marketing department. So I would have to agree. I know you hosted my colleague Keith Wilcox a few months ago, and he described Mays as an academic unicorn. So I would agree 100% with his term.
Yes. Well, we are honored to have you, and I do have one question. You've had a very nonlinear path in your career, and is there anything that you would like to? Is there anything you wish you could change?
Yeah. So I'm not sure I would change a thing, just because all the different things I did and I tried made me the person who I am today, and also made me realize, like in 2020, that I wanted to be an academic, even if it meant like staying one extra year in the PhD program. I knew that I had already tried industry jobs. I had tried marketing consulting. I had tried like marketing management jobs. And even though I liked them, I knew they were not my passion, and I wouldn't want to do them for the rest of my life. So I think those experiences actually helped me get to the point I am right now, even though, as you say, it was not linear, and it also took me longer than maybe other people take to find their passion. But I don't think I would change a thing. Yeah.
There's still this pressure to figure out what you want to be when you grow up, when you're 18, 19. Yeah. And certainly by 22, by the time you get your first job, you should know what you're going to do for the next 50 years.
Yes.
And there's no specific place that pressure comes from, but it kind of comes from everywhere. It's baked into so many of the questions that we get. What are you majoring in? Assuming for a freshman student, assuming that they know what they want to major in, where are you going to start your career? And that sort of, instead of asking what's your first job going to be, knowing that you'll have many others during the course of that time.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And that's something I tell my students when they're start asking me about like the jobs that they have when they graduate and what they're interested in. I tell them like exactly what you say. Like, think about the first job you want, not about the career you want. Yes, you need to have a perspective in terms of like what you want to do in your life, but it's really hard to have young students or like high school students or undergrads, and ask every single undergrad to know exactly where they want to be from here in 20 years or 30 years.
Right.
And at the end, you have to be happy with what you do and really like passionate about it. And sometimes some people know very early on, like, this is what I want to do, and that's awesome. But other people just are not sure. And that's okay too. And you will figure it out as you try different jobs or try different courses or read things, and that's okay too.
Right. Well, and you may end up in a place where you're in your 30s, for example, and there is a market that is just about to explode. But if you had tried to get into that market 10 years ago, it would have been silly. But there's this confluence of circumstances is bringing you to a place where now you can go. That's a fun place to be.
Yeah.
What is teaching students now like? You're pretty fresh to that part of your career, but what are you learning? What's surprised you on this part of your journey?
Yeah, so I teach consumer behavior to business majors here at Mace. I taught it for the first time here in the spring, so I just have one experience so far, and I'll teach it again next spring. But I designed my course. It's a foundational course especially for marketing majors, where you definitely have to cover a lot of foundational principles to help them study and understand consumer behavior. Yeah. So when I joined here, I have a few other colleagues who also teach consumer behavior because it's a really popular class. So we offer it every semester and have many sections. But I feel lucky that it's very related to the research I do. So I think that's also like a blessing for me being here, that I get to do research and then teach something that's very related to what I do. So I enjoy it a lot, and I learn a lot from my students. We cover foundational consumer behavior principles. So this is what you would get in any other consumer behavior course that you would take here or at other business schools, where we learn how to study consumer behavior. I focus a lot on experimentation because that's the main method that I use in my research.
Right.
But then we cover attitudes, persuasion, social influence, decision-making, principles, and that gets us almost through spring break. And then the second half of the course, this is something that I designed, and I think, as I mentioned, worked well. I have modules that are specific to understanding consumer behavior and decision-making in substantive domains. So thinking about, I ask my students to think about how decisions that consumers make and marketing decisions or consumption decisions will impact psychological, physical, and financial well-being. So we have like a week for each, where we are applying the foundational principles from the first half to try to understand how consumers make decisions that could affect their physical, psychological, and financial well-being. And my goal with these modules are to actually remind my students that they are what I call choice architects. The idea that they're designing decision environments.
I like this.
And that's not my term by all means. That's like a term by Richard Taylor and Cass Sunstein and all the awesome work they've done on behavioral decision making and nudges. But I tell them, like, you are choice architects. A marketer has a huge responsibility because you are designing environments in which people make decisions every day. So a decision environment could be a physical space, store. It could be a virtual space. It could be a catalog, a brochure, an ad. And the decisions you make, though some of them might seem trivial to you, they can actually impact consumers' decisions. And those decisions can impact consumer well-being. Right. So like how many products you decide to show to your consumers can impact what type of products they choose, how you order the products, how you price the products, how you message them, how we talked about this new, actually just message, the message of the ad actually impact consumer perceptions. So that's my goal in that second section. Is you have a lot of power, so you have to understand how consumers are making decisions. And often consumers' decisions are impacted by external factors from the decision environment. And as marketers, most of my students are marketing majors, so they will hope to get a job as a marketer. as marketers, your goal is to generate value,
Yes.
of course, and one obvious way is generating value for the company. So you will measure based on like sales, market share, word of mouth metrics.
Yes.
But you have to think about generating value for society, which includes generating value for consumers, right? So for me, the consumer well-being section of my course is really important in the sense that I always remind, again, my students, and when they tell them, like, when you're making these decisions on the job, don't forget that the consumer is also your priority, and that the decisions you make, you have to take into consideration how they'll affect consumer well-being.
What do you think is least well understood among business majors in terms of what impacts physical, psychological, financial well-being? What's the thing that you feel like you have to drill them most firmly on in terms of understand your responsibility in this specific place? Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier how many products you show them and so forth. Where do they make the most mistakes early on?
Yeah, I would say that's just like one example of like products. I think the general idea is that you can think consumers' decisions are impacted by internal factors, like what you want as a consumer, like how much money you have, or how hungry you are in terms of like if you're buying something to eat, or what your goals are, right, in terms of financial goals or health goals, maybe. But I try to remind my consumers that's just one piece, that even though consumers have internal factors and motivations, they're often impacted by external factors.
100%.
Right? So it's not, maybe you have a goal of being healthy and you're thinking, I'm going to order the salad, but then you get to the restaurant and there's an awesome picture of their new burger, or they have a promotion for the fries, or they have some kind of messaging that actually tempts you, and you end up getting something that was not what you wanted or what you thought you would get. So in that sense, I think it's not about a specific, there are many different things that they could do to change or impact consumers' decisions. And it's not, it may vary by context, by industry, by type of product, but I try to remind them about the idea that just a lot of external factors can impact consumer decision making.
How do you parse responsibility for that?
Yeah, that reminded me of a comment that one of my students made, and when we were talking about those examples of like sometimes companies like nudge you or remind you to get the unhealthy option by putting things like near the checkout point, or by putting things
the candy bars
or
in
the price
the supermarket
of things
line
can encourage you to like buy something that's less healthy. And one of my students was like, but what happens if one day someone really needs the chocolate bar? Like if you've been eating salad, but that one day you've had a really hard day and you really need the chocolate bar. It's not, I'm saying that marketers should impose a specific decision to consumers. Like what might work for you might not work for another. The goal for another person, or the goal that you have for yourself, might be very different than the goal that other people have for themselves. And even the goal that you have for yourself for today might be different from the goal that you have for yourself tomorrow in terms of like your eating,
right?
And your eating consumption, right? So I like to tell when I talk about this with my students, I tell them like marketers shouldn't impose options. They shouldn't restrict freedom of choice. Okay. In the sense, like you cannot remove options. Like even though you think that consumers should be eating healthier, you shouldn't restrict options, like not sell some alternatives, or like ban options or tax some options. If you think about policymakers,
right?
Marketers shouldn't make options more or less expensive based on what they think others should do, right? Okay, so it's about like small nudges, things that can frame options in more favorable or less favorable ways, just putting things at the top, or listing calories versus not listing calories. But so in that sense, again, you're designing environments without telling consumers what they should be doing, right? Or actually making them do what you think they should be doing. It's even worse,
right? Is there anyone you'd like to share a good bull with?
Yes. So it would be Professor Leonard Berry. He's one of my colleagues in the marketing department, and I admire him a lot. He's an inspiration to a lot of us in the field, given all the work he's done in service marketing and specific in the healthcare domain. we're going back to our conversation about making an impact on society and the community, I think he would be the perfect example of how he thinks about his work through the lenses of making an impact. So I admire him a lot, and he also has been incredibly supportive to me personally since I joined Mace.
Well, Dr. Berry definitely holds the record for Good Bull on this show, but thank you, Good Bull, to you. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ben, for having me again. This has been so much fun.